The most thrilling thing that happened in the USA when I was young was the civil rights movement. The blacks were fed up and on the move. But in my hometown, which was in Waterloo, Iowa, the civil rights movement seemed far away. It was happening in Chicago, it was happening in Los Angeles, it was definitely happening down south, but not in Iowa. I hardly knew a single black person. Of course, black music was invading my life. It was on the radio all the time. Everyone I knew, we grew up listening to soul music, Motown, Aretha, Marvin Gaye, Stevie, Otis, Stax Records. But other than music on the radio, Iowa seemed to me that it was the whitest state in the USA. My town, however, did actually have black people. Um, Most of Iowa to this day is unbelievably white. You can go in town after 10, you can't find a black person. But in my town, I think if you added up all the black people in Iowa when I was young, about 1 out of 3 lived in my town. And that was because of the John Deere Tractor Company and the Wrath Wheat Pack. They would actually hire blacks, not for good jobs, not for management, but they did hire blacks, and so we had blacks in my town. In terms of housing, the town was completely segregated. I think real estate companies they had I don't know, secret deals, or I don't even know if they were secret, but they just if you were a black person, you could only buy property on the east side of town. You could only rent property on the east side of town. There's a few exceptions to that, but that was 99.5% true. Uh, Black people were all crowded together in what was called the North End, and that was mostly crappy rental property, white landlords. In my neighborhood, it was one of the few neighborhoods on the west side. We actually had one black family, just one. It was all white people, blocks and blocks and blocks of white people. And there's one little crappy house with black people living in it. And one of the kids in that family, Tommy, was in my class. So if you look at my class pictures for like third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, there's one black face in those class pictures, and that's Tommy. And one summer, he and his family, they went on vacation, and their house burned down, and that was arson. Um, the rumor was always white teenagers. No one was ever arrested. I mean, the smoldering ruins reeked of gasoline. It was obviously arson, but no one was ever arrested for that. And after that, there were no more black families in my neighborhood. There were two high schools, West High and East High. And my school was a white school. And it was big, maybe 2,000 students. Those were all white students. We didn't have any black students at all. And all the black kids went to East. Now, East had white people too. Maybe, I suppose it was like half white and half black. There was kind of a mystery in my high school. I remember in the student lounge, they had the pictures of the class presidents. So you could kind of walk around the walls of the student lounge and you could see these people. Um, white boy, white boy, white boy, white girl. What do you know, girl? And white boy, white boy, white boy, white boy, white boy, white girl. And white boy, and then boom, there was a black face. I was kind of shocked. I mean, a black kid, and he went to West and he became a student body president. It just seemed impossible. It turned out that guy was named Don Perkins. And Don Perkins was the only black kid at West when he was around, and he was a great athlete, a superb athlete. He was so damn good, especially in football, that he led them all the way to the state championship. I think they had like an undefeated year. That's how great he was. Eventually went off and played for the pros. He became a Dallas Cowboy. I think he was a Dallas Cowboy for 8 or 9 years. Pro in the Pro Bowl. That's how good he was. How exactly he got into the white school, I don't know. I heard various rumors about it that his siblings went to East, but only he went to West. I don't know for sure if that's true. And I heard maybe his grandmother lived near the city dump on the west side, and they registered him that way. And I always kind of wondered, did money change hands or anything? It was interesting. I went to school like about 10 years later. I'm in high school. and he's long gone by then. And so our team's a white boy team, and I was in the marching band, in my dorky band uniform. And going to the East-West football games was sort of a fascinating experience. A lot of black people didn't even have cars. They would walk over from the east side. The football stadium was over on the west side of town. So you'd have all these white people on one side of the field and all these East fans on the other side of the field. And that would be probably like at least half those people would be black people. And the east side, they're happy and everything, and the west side is very anxious, but kind of hopeful, maybe some good will happen. And the game would start, and hope would die. I mean, hope would die like in 5 minutes, and then the white people would be kind of sad, and then by halftime, despair would set in, and it was like grim by the end of the game. The white people were just hoping for the game to get over. uh, I remember one year, it was like 50 something to 7, and the only reason we even got to 7 was charity. They set down all their starters, and so we managed to score a single touchdown. And next year it was like 40 something to 7. Same deal. East beat West every single year from 1963 to 1973. And that's, I think, when busing started and they had desegregation. And then finally West was able to win a few football games. I can always remember those the black people there like parade home. Everybody's happy. They're celebrating all the way and walking across the bridge, and meanwhile the white people are all driving home in their automobiles, trying to forget about what just happened. I think people forget about how often, even the white people in charge were openly anti-black. I mean, the amount of racism, it was just that was normal. Was just amazing, except for preachers and priests and teachers. I hardly ever met, when I was young, I hardly ever met a white person who wasn't openly racist. Um, I remember, I think that, as I recall, the East High principal one time tried to ban interracial dating. That was his expression, interracial dating. He thought, for the good of the community, we better ban it. Like you can ban love. Of course, that didn't go over very well. Um, the country was in turmoil. Marches all over the country, protests, demonstrations. And of course, I'm watching it on TV. I'm reading about it in the magazines and the newspaper. Martin Luther King was the greatest man in the country. I think he was greater than John Kennedy, greater than Johnson or Nixon. I mean, really, when you think about people like Johnson and Nixon, I don't even know, would you even call them great men? But Martin Luther King, that was my idea of a truly great man, someone that was around when I was young. I remember exactly where I was when he was assassinated. I know everyone in my generation remembers exactly where they were when John Kennedy was assassinated. But I also remember where I was when Martin Luther King Jr. got assassinated. And it was a strange time and a sad time in my family because my grandfather had just died. And he was our beloved grandfather, and he lived there in town, the same town I did. And we would go over to his house every Sunday afternoon for lunch and everything. And kind, good-hearted guy. My uncle, his son, had flown in from the West Coast. And so my dad and I were waiting in the airport for my uncle to get off the plane. And he got off the plane and he looked real sad. And, I thought it was because his father, my grandfather, was dead. And he said, they got him, they shot Martin Luther King. I was kind of shocked, and we went home, and my uncle was really a good guy. He's still with us. He must be about 90 years old by now, but very liberal. He was a Methodist pastor, got involved with good deeds all his life, and he went right. He got as soon as he got his hands on the newspaper, and he goes all the way through the newspaper, and he's looking for a memorial service. And I remember again, like at East High, the black kids wanted to have a memorial service, and the principal refused to let them. And there was a big walkout. And but anyway, one of the big black churches downtown had a memorial service for Martin Luther King. So my uncle says, "Let's go." And my dad is, I think that's a black church, Wes, and Wes did not care. So I went with him, and my little brother Daryl, he went too. We get there, and it's within one of the great big churches downtown. One of those churches with a whole lot of steps going up to the big doors and so like pillars. And There were deacons, black deacons there, and there's nobody but black people going into that church. There's nobody even on the block except for black people. And my uncle doesn't care. He just leads us. And I'm kind of getting a little scared. And I'm not used to being like the only white person in with dozens of black people around me. And the deacons, they block our way. They won't let us go. And my uncle, he's not the least bit intimidated. He sticks out his hand. He says, "Hi, I'm Pastor Wesley Arms, and I heard you folks were having a memorial service for Martin Luther King, and we sure would love to help you worship." And it'd be an honor. And those guys, they just changed just like that. They were happy and welcoming, and they shook my uncle's hand, and they shook my hand. And we were the only whites in a church that was just jammed to the rafters with black people. I remember it was such a sad time. I mean, the assassination of Martin Luther King, it's like, I mean, what could possibly have happened that was worse than that? And yet the church was full of this jubilation, and people were crying, but people were just sort of happy. There was just so much music. I mean, and I was so used to crappy white church music. I had never heard like a really fabulous black church with a really rocking choir, and the pastor would preach and sing and preach and sing, and then people in the congregation would start singing, and kind of spontaneous duets would happen, and there were ladies dancing in the aisles, and it was the happiest, most joyous, funeral that I have ever attended in my life. I remember that service more clearly than the funeral of my own grandfather. That was a painful time for the United States of America. People got mad. Some people did heroic things, and others did shameful things. A great man was assassinated, and yet his spirit, his dream, spread all over the world. I was on the sidelines, a white kid who hardly knew what was happening, but I am glad I lived in that era and I saw it all happen. I'm glad I'm one of the few white people from Waterloo, Iowa, who ever went to a memorial service for Martin Luther King the year he was assassinated, even though I did have to be dragged there by my uncle. Thanks, Uncle Wes.